The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Graham Hancock, the British journalist, filmmaker, and best-selling author. Your career began over 40 years ago as a writer for some of Britain's leading newspapers, including The Times, The Independent, The Guardian, and The Economist. But since 1990, you have dedicated your life to researching and exploring ideas outside the mainstream narrative, where you believe that much of what we are told about our history is wrong. As an author, you've written 26 books, including the international bestsellers The Sign and the Seal, Heaven's Mirror, Fingerprints of the Gods, and the sequel, Magicians of the Gods, which have sold more than 5 million copies worldwide and been translated into 27 languages. Your latest venture, the Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, sees you visit archaeological sites across the world to uncover evidence of an incredibly advanced ancient civilization that you believe existed thousands of years ago. The show has been a massive success and featured in the top 10 most watched Netflix shows in 31 different countries. Graham, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be back with you.
Great to be here. It's been just over 10 years since you were first here, back in September 2012. This is your 5th appearance here.
Yeah.
And a few months ago, I got this strange email where your production company was asking for a small little sliver
That's right,
of one of our shows together. And I couldn't have been more excited to get it to him. We just stopped everything here. We went and found it on the hard drives. And I was anticipating this series. We obviously had to keep everything quiet.
Yeah.
And then to watch it drop on Netflix, to see it like number 2 in the world, to watch that opening shot where you're walking people through your ideas, it made me feel great.
Good.
And the fact that the whole world got to finally see 30 years of your research and it to be so well produced, you put so much work into going to these sites. I've been reading your books for years and I didn't know a lot of the details of what you were talking about. What's this process been like of filming it, now seeing it, and then also dealing with all of the feedback or criticism, shall we say?
I think it's the first time that a thoroughly researched alternative view of prehistory has been presented on a major platform. Of course, there are many shows which question the history of the human race. But my thesis is that we have lost an episode of our story, that during the Ice Age, there was a civilization on planet Earth, which was not an alien civilization. It didn't have anything to do with aliens. It was not any particular unique race of people. It was human beings who had risen slightly above the level of hunter-gatherer. The general view is that during the Ice Age, our ancestors were entirely hunter-gatherers. And that's not to say that they were unsophisticated or stupid. Hunter-gatherers are very smart people, and we still have hunter-gatherers living in the world today. And actually, if our civilization were to collapse, which is by no means impossible, the people who would be most likely to survive on Earth are the hunter-gatherers, not us in so-called advanced industrial civilizations. I'm actually not talking about a super advanced civilization during the Ice Age. I'm not talking about a civilization that had cell phones or televisions or sent people to the moon. I'm talking about a civilization that had reached a level of knowledge that is above that we would normally expect for hunter-gatherers. And that level of knowledge includes exploration of the world and mapping of the entire world. And part of the evidence I present is ancient maps which show the world as it looked during the Ice Age, and yet which have extremely accurate relative longitudes. Longitude is a problem our civilization didn't crack until the middle of the 18th century. So the fact that there's evidence of a map-making, global exploring civilization during the Ice Age immediately suggests that they had at least reached a level of technology similar to our own level of technology in the mid 18th century, and I wouldn't claim more than that. What I'm interested in is the kind of knowledge that they focused on. There's evidence for astonishingly advanced knowledge of astronomy deep in the last Ice Age, knowledge that could only result from really hundreds or thousands of years of consistent observations and detailed record keeping of those observations. I can go into more detail on that, but it particularly concerns a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, which changes the rising times and positions and orientation in the sky of constellations, because the Earth is the viewing platform from which we view the sky. Changes in the orientation of that platform change our perspective on the sky. And this is a regular cyclical process, but it's very, very slow. It unfolds over a period of just under 26,000 years, a complete cycle. And to observe that and calculate it precisely and have exact knowledge of it is not something that archaeologists believe happened until the time of the Greeks, roughly 2,200 years ago, let's say. But the evidence is that it was present during the Ice Age. It's present on cave art in the Ice Age, and it's present on myths and traditions which come down from the remotest antiquity. And I'm not the only person saying this. Professor Giorgio de Santillana, who was professor of the history of science at MIT, and his co-author Hertha von Deschend, who was professor of the history of science at the University of Frankfurt, wrote an amazing book back in the 80s called Hamlet's Mill, which documents this extremely ancient knowledge of precession. And they, as a couple of historians of science, wonder out loud in their book, where did this come from? And they can only conclude that there must be some lost ancestral civilization that had accumulated and acquired this knowledge, and that fragments of it were then passed down over thousands and thousands of years and finally entered into the historical record. So I'm not talking about a civilization that's quote unquote advanced in the way we imagine ourselves to be. I don't think we should be looking for any plastic bottles. I don't think we should be looking for any remains of motor cars. I think we're looking for a civilization that was different from our own, but that had a high level of achievement in areas that we ourselves have been, relatively latecomers to. That's the kind of perspective that I have on it. Don't look for ourselves in the past. Look for something different from ourselves, but nevertheless was capable of doing things that archaeologists tell us nobody was capable of doing at that time.
And this theory is something you've been thinking about and talking about for decades.
Yeah, I've been involved in it for a very long time. I mean, it started for me back in the 80s when at which time I was a journalist, and my beat included Ethiopia, and I became interested in I was based in Nairobi in Kenya at that time. I was East Africa correspondent for The Economist, and I came across the Ethiopian claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, which I found that archaeologists sneered at, and yet it was central to Ethiopian culture. And I began to investigate it. And as I began to look into it more deeply, I found that there was much merit to the Ethiopian claim. And eventually wrote a book about that, which was published in 1992 called The Sign and the Seal. Now, that was the first time that I'd stepped out of current affairs and used such investigative skills as I have to explore a historical mystery. And in that exploration, I became aware of two things that I hadn't been aware of before. Firstly, that archaeologists often do not do justice to the past. The sneering, condescending attitude to the Ethiopian claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant, just dismissing it out of hand without looking into all the underlying evidence that supports it, to my mind, is very shameful on the part of archaeology. They need to have more respect for the ancient traditions of cultures that they talk about. So I realized then, back in the late 80s and the early 90s, that in archaeology I was dealing with a discipline which had a particular fixed view about the past and was not willing to widen that view out in any way. And the other aspect of that investigation, well, it took me to Egypt. You can't tell the story of the Ark of the Covenant without considering the story of Moses and his Egyptian background. It took me to Egypt, and then I found myself for the first time in 1989 actually confronted by the majesty of the Great Pyramid and the mystery of it. And I was stunned. I was just awestruck by this enormous, incredibly precise, beautiful thing. And I immediately wanted to find out what are archaeologists saying about it. And I found that same kind of very narrow, very limited focus in the archaeological accounts, that they insist that the Great Pyramid was built as the tomb for a specific pharaoh. When in fact there's no evidence that it was built as a tomb for a specific pharaoh. In fact, there's 100+ pyramids in Egypt, and no body of any pharaoh has ever been found in any one of them. There was great excitement when they found a sealed chamber inside the pyramid of Zoser at Saqqara, and in it a sealed sarcophagus. And the hope was that they would find the body of a pharaoh inside there. When they broke it open, the sarcophagus was empty. It had never been looted. It was totally locked and closed, but it was empty. So there's a great mystery about these things. The evidence that the pyramids were built as tombs, particularly the Old Kingdom pyramids, particularly the pyramids of Giza, that the evidence that they were built as tombs is extremely flimsy, and yet that is the story, that is the narrative that archaeologists present. And my feeling was, I need to question this narrative. I need to look at it. Nobody's questioning this narrative. Somebody has to question it and say, well, does it really make sense when you're building a tomb for a pharaoh? Yeah, I get it that you want to build something big and impressive, but would you go to all the trouble of aligning it within a tiny fraction of a single degree of true north? I mean, that is a major technological achievement to get your pyramid, which weighs 6 million tons and has a footprint of 13 acres, aligned very precisely to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. Nobody's going to know that. Your monument's going to look equally impressive if it's 5 degrees off true north, but the very great care that was taken to do that suggested to me that there's something going on with the heavens and the sky. And then, of course, I came across Robert Bauval's really important work, the Orion correlation theory, which shows that the pattern of the pyramids on the ground is a model of the 3 stars of the belt of the constellation of Orion. And Orion wasn't just any old constellation, it was the figure of the god Osiris in the sky, as far as the ancient Egyptians were concerned. So Egyptological arguments that this is just a random coincidence are completely defeated by the fact that the constellation chosen was the single most important constellation in the Egyptian system. And then furthermore, the orientation of the pyramids on the ground in their relation to the 3 stars of the belt in the sky only becomes perfect 12,500 years ago. It's not perfect 4,500 years ago when the pyramids are supposed to have been built. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the pyramids were built 12,500 years ago, but what I am saying is that there was a deliberate intention to use the language of astronomy and monumental architecture to memorialize a specific time. And that specific time, when you look at the astronomy, is roughly between 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago. Things move slowly in the sky. It's an epoch, it's not a moment. It's an epoch of about 1,200 years. And that epoch turns out to have been a cataclysmic epoch on planet Earth. It's the epoch that geologists know as the Younger Dryas. So I've just gradually worked my way into this subject, and my purpose has been, I feel that archaeologists have enjoyed a monopoly on the narrative of the past. They are the ones that we in our civilization entrust with telling us the truth about the past. And we've got into the habit of not asking them questions, of not questioning their pronouncements about how the past worked. And I felt that there was a role and a need for somebody who, in an intelligent, thoroughly worked out, thoroughly referenced and sourced way, would question the mainstream archaeological narrative. And specifically to consider the possibility that they've missed something really big in our past. And to me, that's where all the evidence points to. It's like a black hole. You almost recognize it by its absence. There's something missing in the past, and there's loads of anomalies that come down to it, that come down from that can only be explained by a forgotten episode in the human story. So I've made it my business to be an advocate of that position, to question the mainstream narrative and to offer an alternative narrative. And I don't insist that people believe me. I just want to add it to the mixture of information that people receive, so that there's not this monopolistic control of information on our past that archaeologists have undeservedly enjoyed for the last century or so.
And what was the reaction early on, kind of fingerprints of the gods type of time? This is pre-internet as well, which is interesting.
Yeah,
and yet the book sold massively worldwide.
It did.
That's probably where you first started feeling the resistance.
Yes, it's when I first started noticing that archaeologists respond to my alternative narrative, not actually by deconstructing that narrative, but simply by making statements of authority. Hancock is wrong. 100 years of archaeology has not found any evidence for a lost civilization, therefore his claims are bogus. And then they started to add to that, Hancock is a pseudo-scientist or a pseudo-archaeologist. These are labels. First of all, you come from a position of authority and say, we're archaeologists, we know everything. This man is an outsider, he's just a journalist, what does he know? Don't even listen to him. And then secondly, when you find that people are listening to him, you then attach a label to him and say he's a pseudo-archaeologist or a pseudo-scientist, as though I'm pretending to be an archaeologist or a scientist. I don't pretend to be an archaeologist or a scientist. I don't want to be an archaeologist. I am not a scientist. I am a journalist. I'm investigating a story where one narrative has controlled people's understanding of the past for far too long. And my purpose is to provide an alternative narrative, and I do so as a journalist. So I object to being called a pseudo-archaeologist or a pseudo-scientist. It's ridiculous to label me with that, but it's a very clever way to dismiss an opponent's work, is to say, oh, he's just a false example of what we really are. And just hope that people will say, oh, he's a pseudo-scientist, we'll not investigate this any further. If somebody hears my name for the first time and maybe remotely interested in the ideas that I put out, the very first place they're going to go is Wikipedia.
I went there this morning.
Yeah, and the Wikipedia page will announce that I'm a promoter of pseudo-scientific theories.
First line.
First line, right up there in the front. And so the purpose of that is to get people who might be interested in my work to switch off right away and not take it further. And it's a deliberate purpose, because Wikipedia pages are generally editable, but my page is not. You can't make edits on my page. There's a team of moderators who closely control the page, and anybody who attempts to edit it, all edits are rejected. The page is locked and controlled by moderators who include archaeologists and friends of archaeologists. So actually, Wikipedia is
a hive of censorship.
Wikipedia is not serving up an honest, unbiased, objective approach to my work. What Wikipedia is serving up is the view of a small group of archaeologists about my work. That's what's happening. This is not an encyclopedia in that sense. I mean, it makes me wonder. I happen to know my own story, and I happen to know, the facts of that. But it makes me wonder about every other single fact that Wikipedia presents. Is the whole thing agenda-driven? Is it serving the interests of a small, specific interest group who have taken control of that page? I think Wikipedia need to change their policies. They should not allow one side of a debate to control what is supposedly an encyclopedia talking about that debate. Both sides should have their say if it's to be balanced in any way.
Yeah, Wikipedia has completely conflicting narratives all throughout that. I don't trust anything they say. And unfortunately, with the title and the name, it shows as if it promotes itself as some unbiased, objective version.
That couldn't be further from the truth.
Just not true.
I know from my own experience that it is deeply biased and totally unobjective. And I suspect that is true with many other Wikipedia articles as well. So these days, if I do want to search information on a subject and Wikipedia comes up as the first hit, I may look at what they say, but I'm going to check very carefully. I'm going to check very carefully the authenticity of what they're saying. And it's most unfortunate, because Wikipedia could be a beautiful thing, but it should not taint itself by handing over pages to particular interest groups who have skin in the game and wish to put another interest group down.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.